and the back check. And the forecheck is when you're attacking and the other player have the puck in the defensive zone. You're trying to get it back, so to speak. So if you're one of these green arrow people, you're trying to get the puck back away from the other team in their zone so that you can take a chance at shooting. And if you're on the back check, which we'll have next slide, then that means that you're in your defensive zone and they have the puck and you're trying to get it from them. So the check means that you're trying to get the puck away from the other team. And forward or back depends on whether you're attacking or defending. Here's some basic strategies for forecheck and back check. And this one that's being shown, this graph here, is a 1-2-2. You call it a 1-2-2 because one player goes in deep, two players stay sort of in front of the net, and then the last two players are at the blue line. So you might have a 2-3 or a 3-2, and it all just depends on how deep players go and who is allowed to go where. And then there are other strategies on top of this, but these numbers are actually what they'll call the forecheck when they're talking about, the actual technical terms. So, when you see a 2-3 forecheck, you can like recognize it and be like, oh, that's a 2-3 forecheck. I kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, there are other ones that are not number ones that are like more intricate, but these are the basics. For the back check, they don't really use numbers as much. The biggest ones are zone. People do use 2-3. There's man on man, which basically just means that you follow your guy no matter what, even if he doesn't have the puck. It's like everybody kind of has a person to follow and you do it. And that can work in some cases, and it's easy to get lost that way sometimes too when you don't rotate men. So somebody doesn't know to pick up your guy if you're switching off, and it can get a little bit crazy, but it works in some cases. So if they're cycling the puck around and not moving very much, you might use man on man, because then you're not moving very much and everybody kind of knows where each other is. That's great. But if they're rotating their players a lot, which people tend to do to frazzle your defense, then you might want to use a collapse or compression method, or you might want to use a zone where you stay in your zone of the ice and they move around, and that's okay. So a collapse or a compression is what's shown here. This is a compression box or a collapse box where you see they're fine to kind of go around the edge where you have F 1, 2, 3 and D 1 and 2 are your players and the X's are the other team. And you can see they're using a 1-2-2 forecheck here like we saw in the last one. And the defensive person is going to get the puck away, and these forwards are generally covering in a zone sort of coverage. In my opinion, he should be farther up, but what are you going to do, right? And then when the puck is specifically in possession of the other team, like they have the possession of the puck, and there's a problem, you have these players all come back into the box formation and protect the goal. This tends to work very well when they're trying to create chances in a way that's not structured very well. So when I say that, I mean they're not moving very much, or they're moving more, and they're not trying to play a zone offense. They're not trying to stay in one place. It doesn't work very well against sort of something like an umbrella where they can just kind of line you. You're all in the box, right, and they stay back and just shoot against you. So there's a lot of different strategies, and people who actually play and coach might be more into this, but it doesn't interest me very much. I just look at it like I kind of know what's going on with that. I like numbers better. Any questions on this?
So it may be totally nonsensical, but at least in football, there's a clear delineation where you're able to at least talk with your teammates to figure out what your strategy is.
Mm-hmm.
This would seem to be a little bit more organic than that.
Oh yeah.
So how, if I'm a player on the ice, how do I actually know what my team now is going to do?
You play to the strategy that have been laid out ahead of time by the coach. So the coach will say, your line uses this strategy, and if I tell you to switch, you switch, otherwise you do this. And you go over it in practice, and you know it, and there might be plays still, like in football, but it's much more organic, and the communication is all real time on the ice while you're playing.
So you say the coach has gone over it. Is it like based on who's currently on the ice? We play this way?
Yeah, it can be, absolutely. Especially if there's a specific player or set of players on the other team they're trying to combat or shut down.
Okay.
So, you have Alexander Ovechkin, who's this crazy goal scorer, and like, he's a big deal. Sometimes teams will be like, everybody else on his line is like pretty, good. They're good hockey players, but he is the real threat. They're going to try to get the puck to him, so they'll put 2 people on him, and they'll play it differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But otherwise, you have a strategy that your team or your line specifically will follow, and that's it. You do that. One last thing that I forgot to mention is that in hockey you have 4 forward lines of 3 players each, and 3 defensive lines of 2 players each, and 2 goaltenders. So that's the makeup of the whole team. So you have 4 forward lines, 3 defensive lines, 2 goaltenders. Usually you'll pick a goaltender, he'll play the whole game, and then you have your other lines will switch out as you go. A lot of teams will just roll lines, so what that means is the first line goes, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth, and they just kind of keep going. The first doesn't even necessarily get that much more time than the others, even though the first is generally the better players, and the fourth is generally the worst players. Here's another interesting strategy. It's called the neutral zone trap. You can see these 3 players force the person who has the puck into the boards, doesn't allow them to have anything open, so to speak, to get through, and that means that they then have to dump the puck in. So you can see how that happens here, where the breakout pass goes, breakout meaning you're leaving your defensive zone, pass goes to this guy here, and then he's like, oh, I'm totally going to skate through the neutral zone, but then 3 people kind of make his job really hard, and he ends up having to dump the puck in as soon as he can. And you can see he kind of waits before he waits to get to the red line first, so he doesn't ice it. The way to play against this would be to pass the puck in a way that's not necessarily forward all the time. So like if this guy had kind of come to the right here instead, and then this guy had maybe come through, and then you could make a pass, it would go slower. But this team is playing a defensive strategy that is very much centered in the neutral zone. So that means if you get past them, there's nobody behind the neutral zone. So generally you can have somebody skate up a little farther forward and be able to have be open for the pass, so the person with the puck isn't necessarily in the front. And these kinds of strategies are what you use to combat the other team's strengths. Oh, they have great shooters. Okay, well, let's make it so that they can't carry the puck into the zone. You change the strategy so that you're not just playing the same. One player goes down one end and shoots, and the other player goes down the other end and shoots. Believe me, that happens, but a lot of the time it's not what's going on. I think this is my conclusion for strategies. Any questions on that? Good. Oh, wait. Read. Ann?
Oh, no. Sorry, I didn't have
I'm moving. So this is the interesting part. Everything I've talked about now, and I think I'm doing okay on time, is how do you play the game? That's boring. There are numbers. There's numbers behind all that. It makes it way better. So first we'll talk about what it's like to sort of be a player as far as how their career goes, and then we'll talk about sort of contracts and all the interesting things that can go on and how it's regulated as a system. So when you're pre-professional, you're a little kid, you're playing in the mini-mites or other equivalent leagues, and then you're playing in the mites, as you're growing up, and then maybe you're a squirt, and then you'll be a peewee, and then as you're growing up and you're still serious about hockey, you might be a bantam. And then after that, you're looking at either midgets or, then you're playing a U16 or they come tons of different names, but basically it's 16 and under, usually 15 or 16-year-old. And this is like pre-professional. You're not doing this any particular way. You don't even have to be good. Some of these teams, most of these teams, you don't even have to try out for. As you get to bantams and U16, you're probably gonna have to try out. But peewees and up here on this chart, it's like little kids, they barely even know how to skate. But then once you get to teenage years, they start to really show they know what they're doing. And this is when you start to see players getting scouted, and you start to see people looking out and be like, okay, this person's actually going to lead a professional hockey career. And then you get to midgets or U18, depending on where you're from. U18 is something I believe is bigger in America, and midgets is bigger in Canada, but it doesn't matter because they basically are the same thing. So, there are national teams at this level. There are tournaments that are national and international at this level. These are people who are playing because they're very good at the game relative to everybody else they've ever played with. And they're actually possibly going to be professional players. Not everybody, obviously, but many players who are looking to become professional will be playing this, or all of them will be, and some who are not, obviously, but yeah. And then after that, if you're not looking to play professional, you'll go into what's called club hockey or adult hockey, and that's just like you're an adult, figure it out yourself. Maybe they have leagues. It doesn't. There's not as much restriction on age or anything like that. It's just adults playing hockey in a casual sense. If you're professional, you're going to either play college hockey, and that's big in America, or you'll play in the CHL leagues, which are the Canadian Hockey League. That's going to be, you have leagues like the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and other leagues that are for players usually under 21 years old, I think is the cap. Where most of the players are between like a 16, 17, 18, 19 range, and then like 20, 21 is like most of them have left, but they might still be training at that point. So just like the college level, and you'll see people who want to go to college will play on their college hockey team. Some of them leave. We've had RPI players who will leave before they're graduated. Some of them will wait for graduation. It's up to the player usually. Some organizations, some professional organizations will put pressure on the player to leave college early, but many others do not. Alright, this is pretty straightforward. You play hockey in many different leagues, and then eventually you get good enough where someone offers you money to do it. Alright. So once if you're in college and you're in CHL or you're in CHL, then you were drafted or you were selected by the organization. So either you were drafted into the CHL, and we'll talk about what a draft is and how that works. CHL is a little bit different. They call it an import draft. It's how you get into the league. It's something we'll talk about on an NHL level, and I'll gloss over it for